a more dedicated and a more inspiring trio of Yiddish lovers and Yiddish scholars than the people that we have here today. It's such an honor to have them here, and they are Professor Bruce Weiss, who is the Martin Peretz Professor of Yiddish Literature and Comparative Literature at Harvard University, David Fishman, who is a Professor of History at the Jewish Theological Seminary and who knew Brada personally, and Aaron Lansky, who many of you know because I know there are many Book Center members here, who is the founder and president of the Yiddish Book Center. And I'm going to welcome Aaron Lansky here today. I hope you'll all join me.
Shalom Aleichem. So back in the late 1970s, I was a graduate student studying Yiddish literature with Ruth Weiss in Montreal. And back in those days, I used to go almost every day to the Jewish Public Library to do research. And I was there one day in 1978 when there was a great commotion. There was always kind of a certain level of commotion in the library, as you can imagine. About 4 in the afternoon, the Yiddish papers would arrive from New York City. And there was a group of old men who would sit around, they probably weren't so old, they were quite naive. In fact, then it came old to me. Who would sit around waiting for the papers to arrive. And on that particular day, the paper came and bore a banner headline that said that Bashives Singer had won the Nobel Prize in Literature. So you'd think they would be ecstatic. Yiddish finally gets to do exactly the opposite. Screaming, comeuppance, and carrying on. It's a shanda. How could they have done such a thing? They went on and on. Finally, after maybe 5 or 10 minutes of cacophony, they finally decided the prize should have gone to Chaim Grade. That was such a rare moment of unanimity in that world that I was kind of astonished. But it only lasted for a minute. It lasted for about a minute. Someone else said, no, forget what, they should have given it to Peretz. One of the great masters of early Yiddish literature, and then they all agreed, yes, Peretz would have surely at this point the librarian in the audience said they would give it to Peretz because they could only give it to living writers, and Peretz died in 1915, at which point one of the men looked at me and said, well, I tell you the story only because it reveals attitudes of many in the Yiddish world, first of all, towards Bashives Singer, known as Bashives in the Yiddish world, for reasons that will undoubtedly be elucidated today. But it also identifies 2 of the kind of twin peaks of Yiddish literature in the second half of the 20th century, Bashives Singer and Chaim Grade. So I'm going to take a quick poll right now. How many of you have read Bashives? That looks to be almost everybody. Now next, how many of you have read Grade? And that's maybe now or so, which is pretty much what I had expected. When I was growing up in New Bedford, Massachusetts, I can remember going to the local bookstore, and there on the shelf was this writer. I had no idea who this was, named Bashives Singer, and I couldn't help but notice because they were paperback editions of his work with very sexy covers on them. And I remember reading these books in high school, but not really understanding what this was all about. It was a kind of Jewish world that seemed so wildly exotic to me that I had no context for it. Later on, after Bashives won the Nobel Prize, you could literally find his books in airport bookstores. I can assure you Chaim Grade never made it to the airports. In fact, not all of Grade's work has yet been translated into English. Almost everything's out of print. And I'm told that at this point, if you want to find a copy of his masterwork, the Yeshiva Tamachalis in English, it's published by an author, but you can only find it in a used edition that's now running about $250 on Amazon. So there's clearly a big difference in the way in which these 2 writers have fared in America, where they both ended up. Part of the reason is a personal one. After Chaim Grade died, his wife very zealously defended protected his legacy as she thought she was doing. She limited his translation. It's possible there were still manuscripts of the yet to see the light of day, and certainly stifled widespread conversation and discussion of his work. But I think the differences go far deeper than that. I think it will also become clear today. I mean, simply stated, I think that Bashives explored broad, existential, and in some ways universal questions against a rather exotic Jewish backdrop. Whereas Rada, an extraordinary writer, nonetheless explored deeply Jewish issues against a deeply Jewish context, which found perhaps far less universal appeal and perhaps less appeal with younger generations of readers. What will happen now that these books are going to be disseminated far more widely, we don't yet know, and I think today will help also to shed some light on it. Nonetheless, the rivalry between the two writers, between Rada and Bashives, may not be well known in the general world, but it was extremely well known in our household. My wife Gail is here today. As we were raising our children, we received frequent phone calls from Mrs. Rada. And oftentimes I wasn't home, and one of our two daughters would answer the phone, and she would regale them and just kind of play with them. She'd go on for 20 or 30 minutes, and she would impugn them and say, "Make sure you must promise me you will never read the blasphemous buffoon," which was her sort of endearing name for Bashives. I have to say, at that point, my daughter Sasha was probably 10 and Saba was 8. There was very little chance they were going to go out and read Bashives Singer at that moment. Nonetheless, she was very, determined to put that forth. Cynthia Rosick, in her brilliant short story, Envy or Yiddish in America, explored some of the issues and the kind of, the issues of envy and how that shaped Jewish writers. Bashives appears to be one of the characters in the story. Rada is not the second one, by the way. But as I suspect you'll discover today, the differences transcend envy and they transcend personal antipathy, and really show us two very different sides of Yiddish literature in the second half of the 20th century. It's only now with Mrs. Rada's passing, though, that we're free publicly to explore Rada's legacy and to weigh him against Bashives in a forum like this. In fact, the first such discussion that I participated in was about 2 months ago at the Yiddish Book Center, when we offered a conference on Chaim Grade. David Fishman, Justin Campy from Smith College, and Joseph Berger from the New York Times all joined us for a weekend, which was enormously engaging. Wow, what an exciting subject. And there was so much that we had laying late that we had a chance to explore until then. And I think a lot of that, again, will spill forth today. So I'm very delighted with the panel we have for you. David Fishman, Professor of Jewish History at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and Ruth Weiss, my teacher, is now a professor at Harvard. As you'll see, David knew Rada well and will speak both biographically and historically. And Ruth will examine two remarkable autobiographical works that will contrast in her inimitable fashion. I think she'll be able to draw the contrast between them. Bashives is in the South of Space Institute, My Father's Court, and Rada's De Mother's Shavuos, or the Mother's Sabbath Days in English translation. After each of them has a chance to speak, we're going to open up, we're all going to sit around the round table. Each of us will have a microphone, and we're going to open up the floor to questions and discussion. So with all that said, that's what lies before us this afternoon, and it's my very great honor to begin by introducing to you Professor David Fishman.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you to the Museum on Eldridge Street for organizing this very special, already special event. I'm going to focus mainly on Chaim Grade, which was my original charge here, and the writer I know personally, whose works I know better, and maybe to compensate for the fact that he's less broadly known. But before I get there, a broad comment about both writers, which is they're not just very different writers, but in many ways they represent two different cultures and two more subculture, East European Jewry, that is Bashives, the Polish Jew, and Grade, the Litvak. And this is not only something you can catch in their language, Yiddish dialect, Yiddish terminology is different, but in many themes and styles in their prose. Bashives' attraction to demons, to the irrational and the inexplicable. These are features of the Kabbalah in Poland for centuries and of the Hasidic that thrived in the region where he grew up, near Warsaw. And Grade's focus on conflicted character and the striving of people to change and their inability to change is straight out of the movement. A movement that started in Lithuania, very much part and parcel of Lithuanian Jewish culture. So when we look at these two writers, they really in some ways are the climactic reflections of two versions of East European Judaism. And now to Grade. Chaim Grade immigrated to the United States in 1948. At that time, he was a 38-year-old writer. He had several books of poetry under his belt. Some of them had won prizes and awards. He was well known. And then he spent the next 34 years in America, 1948 to his death in 1980. So that was in many ways a turning point and a new beginning for him, his life, and his career. He was lucky to get into the United States. His two best colleagues and friends, were both interested in immigrating to America, and both of them could not refuse the immigration to America because of either real or imagined connections to communism. So Grade was lucky. He came with a young second wife who he had just married a few years earlier. His first wife from Galicia had perished in the Vilna Ghetto. She was a nurse, the daughter of a rabbi. His second wife, 15 years younger than him, was Soviet-born, Soviet-raised, and a student of literature. But it was also a new beginning for him in his personal life. And third, when he came to America, he made a new beginning in his literary career. He decided to begin writing prose and novels, in addition to poetry, until then he'd been only a poet. And he began to publish his first book of prose, Zaman Shabbat and the Holy Sabbath Days, which first appeared in serialization in the newspaper Berthold, and then Grade went on to publish 6 volumes of prose and 3 additional novels which have never appeared in book form, and 5 additional volumes of poetry. If you look at those 6 volumes of prose, and you have to dig into the press and look at the 3 novels that never got published, you will see that there isn't a single story, a single scene, a single chapter that is set in America. He may be, in fact, the only great American Yiddish prose writer who never wrote anything that takes place. All of his prose, virtually all of his prose, is set in Jewish Eastern Europe. There are some small exceptions. The only well-known one is a short story or essay, as he calls it, like Professor David, which takes place in Paris, mainly to emigrate back to the war in Paris. Overwhelmingly, his novels take place in what Jews call Lithuania, which is then actually northeastern Poland, between the 2 world wars, between 1918 and 1939. And first and foremost, the vast majority of the prose takes place